The morning fog hung thick over the Belgian countryside when Captain Heinrich Müller received orders that would change everything. His artillery battery had dominated this sector for months, their 88mm guns keeping Allied forces at bay. But somewhere across those misty fields, American forces were positioning something the Germans had never encountered before. A weapon so powerful, so precise, that it could reach targets they believed were completely safe. In less than an hour, Müller's entire understanding of artillery warfare would be shattered by a single devastating barrage that came from impossibly far away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The date was October 15th, 1944, and the small Belgian town of Veveyes had been under German occupation for over 4 years. Captain Heinrich Müller commanded Artillery Battery 347, positioned on a strategic hilltop 3 miles southeast of the town center. His battery consisted of 4 88mm anti-tank guns and 2 105mm howitzers, weapons that had served the Wehrmacht well throughout the war. From their elevated position, Müller's men could observe and control nearly 8 miles of the surrounding valley, making any Allied advance extremely costly. Müller was a veteran of the Eastern Front, having fought in the brutal campaigns around Stalingrad before being transferred west in early 1944. At 32 years old, he had earned his reputation through precise calculations and an almost supernatural ability to read terrain. His men respected him not just for his tactical skill, but for his careful planning that had kept most of them alive through 2 years of increasingly desperate fighting. The battery's position was nearly perfect from a defensive standpoint. They occupied the ruins of an old monastery, its thick stone walls providing excellent protection, while the bell tower served as an observation post. The hilltop offered commanding views in all directions, and Müller had spent weeks plotting firing solutions for every possible approach route. Supply lines ran through a network of farm roads that connected to the main highway leading back to Germany, ensuring steady ammunition resupply despite Allied air superiority. On this particular morning, Müller stood in the observation post studying intelligence reports that had arrived with the dawn supply convoy. Allied forces were massing somewhere to the west, but reconnaissance flights hadn't been able to pinpoint their exact positions. What concerned him more were reports from other artillery units operating further north. Several batteries had been hit by counter-battery fire of unusual accuracy, and with some positions being eliminated from distances previously thought impossible. Sergeant Klaus Weber, Müller's most experienced gun commander, climbed the narrow stone stairs to join him in the tower. Weber had been with the battery since its formation in 1942 and knew the capabilities of every weapon system the Allies possessed, or so they both believed. "Sir, the morning radio check revealed something interesting," Weber reported, consulting his notes. Battery 291, positioned near Malmedy, went silent at 0347 hours. The last transmission indicated they were taking incoming fire, but they reported no visual contact with enemy positions. Müller frowned as he traced the location on his map. Battery 291 had been positioned 12 miles northwest of their current location, on another hilltop that should have provided excellent observation of Allied movements. If they had been overrun, it meant American forces were moving faster and with more coordination than intelligence reports suggested. "Any word from the forward observers?" Müller asked. "Radio contact established with Observer Post Delta at 600. They report movement in the Herbermont sector, approximately 7 miles west-southwest of our position. Vehicle noise suggests mechanized infantry, possibly a full battalion." Müller nodded, making calculations in his head. 7 miles put enemy forces well within range of his 105mm howitzers, and the terrain in that direction offered several excellent firing positions. But something about the pattern of recent attacks bothered him. Artillery units were being eliminated with a precision that suggested the Americans had developed new targeting methods, possibly involving aerial observation or improved radio coordination. The morning passed quietly, with routine maintenance and ammunition checks occupying the gun crews. Mueller used the time to study aerial photographs taken 3 days earlier by a reconnaissance plane that had managed to avoid Allied fighters. The images showed extensive American preparations in the Ardennes region, with supply depots and staging areas that indicated a major offensive was being planned. What caught his attention were several unusual vehicle formations visible in the photographs. Large, self-propelled guns unlike anything he had seen in intelligence briefings. The resolution wasn't sufficient to determine their exact specifications, but the size suggested weapons significantly larger than the standard American 105mm howitzers his battery had faced before. At 10:30 hours, Observer Post Delta transmitted an urgent report. American forces were indeed advancing through the Herbermont sector, but in much greater strength than initially estimated. The forward observer, Lieutenant Hans Kruger, reported seeing at least 2 full battalions of infantry supported by Sherman tanks and self-propelled artillery. "Range to the lead elements?" Mueller asked over the radio. 6,400 meters and closing," came Kruger's response. "They're moving along the river road, perfect target concentration." Mueller felt the familiar rush of anticipation that came before engaging the enemy. His guns were already loaded with high explosive shells, and the firing solutions had been calculated weeks ago. The Americans were advancing directly into a carefully prepared killing zone. "All guns prepare for a fire mission," he commanded. The battery sprang into action with practiced efficiency. Gun crews made final adjustments to elevation and deflection, while ammunition handlers stood ready with additional shells. Weber coordinated the firing sequence from his position beside the number 1 gun, a 105mm howitzer that had accounted for 3 Sherman tanks in previous engagements. "Range 6,200 meters, deflection left 30 miles, Mueller called out as he tracked the American advance through his binoculars. "High explosive, impact fuse, fire for effect." The first salvo erupted from the battery position with thunderous roars that echoed across the valley. Mueller watched the shells arc through the morning sky, dark specks against the gray clouds. The timing was perfect, and he expected to see the familiar eruption of smoke and debris as the rounds impacted among the advancing American column. Instead, he witnessed something that defied his understanding of artillery warfare. Even as his own shells were still in flight, massive explosions began erupting around his battery position. Not the sharp crack of incoming mortar rounds or the whistle of conventional artillery, but the deep, earth-shaking detonations of heavy shells arriving with devastating accuracy. The first round impacted 30 meters from the number 2 gun position, showering the crew with rocks and debris from the monastery wall. The explosion was unlike anything Mueller had experienced, far more powerful than anything he expected American artillery could deliver at such range. Before he could process what was happening, 3 more rounds landed in rapid succession, each one walking closer to his gun positions. Weber's voice crackled over the intercom from his position near the guns. "Sir, we're taking heavy incoming fire, range and bearing unknown." Mueller spun his binoculars across the western horizon, searching desperately for muzzle flashes or smoke signatures that would indicate enemy gun positions. The morning haze limited visibility, but he should have been able to see something at the ranges his experience told him were necessary for such accurate fire. There was nothing visible except empty fields and distant tree lines. Another salvo impacted, this time with 1 round landing directly between 2 of his 88mm guns. The explosion lifted both weapons from their positions and scattered the crews like broken dolls. Muller realized with growing horror that his battery was being systematically destroyed by weapons firing from positions he couldn't even see. The accuracy was impossible. Counter-battery fire required visual observation or sophisticated targeting methods that took time to coordinate. But these rounds were arriving with the precision of pre-registered targets, as if the enemy had been planning this exact engagement for weeks. "All guns, cease fire and prepare for immediate displacement," Muller shouted into his radio. But even as he gave the order, he knew it was too late. Another salvo was already incoming, the distinctive whistle of heavy shells growing louder with each second. The Americans had somehow positioned artillery pieces capable of reaching his carefully chosen position while remaining completely invisible to his observers. The implications were staggering and terrifying. As the next round impacted directly on the number 1 gun position, obliterating Weber and his entire crew in a single devastating explosion, Captain Heinrich Müller began to understand that the war had changed in ways he couldn't have imagined. Somewhere across that misty valley, American artillery was demonstrating capabilities that rendered his years of experience and tactical knowledge obsolete. The Wehrmacht's artillery dominance, built on superior training and positioning, was about to meet a technology that would redefine the very nature of artillery warfare. Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson lowered his field glasses and allowed himself a brief smile of satisfaction. From his command post, established in a converted farmhouse 8 miles west of the German positions, he had watched the opening salvos of his 155mm Howitzer battery tear through the enemy artillery with devastating precision. The morning's engagement represented months of preparation and the culmination of new American artillery doctrine that would revolutionize battlefield tactics. Patterson commanded the 284th Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 12 M114 155 howitzers that had arrived in Europe just 6 weeks earlier. These weapons represented the cutting edge of American artillery technology, capable of delivering 95-pound high-explosive shells to targets nearly 15 miles away with accuracy that German forces had never encountered. The colonel had spent his entire military career in artillery, beginning as a second lieutenant in the peacetime army of 1938. Unlike many of his contemporaries who had risen through infantry or armor commands, Patterson was a true specialist who understood the mathematical precision and logistical complexity that made modern artillery effective. His battalion had trained extensively at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where they had perfected the coordination between forward observers, fire direction centers, and gun crews that made long range possible. Standing beside Patterson at the observation window was Major Robert Harrison, the battalion's operations officer and a former mathematics professor from Cornell University. Harrison had been instrumental in developing the fire control procedures that allowed the 155 howitzers to engage targets at unprecedented ranges while maintaining the accuracy necessary for effective counter-battery work. "Time of flight, 14 minutes 32 seconds, Harrison announced, consulting his calculations. "All rounds on target, battery neutralized." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The destruction of the German artillery position had been accomplished through a combination of careful planning and technological superiority that represented a fundamental shift in how artillery warfare was conducted. For weeks, Patterson's battalion had been analyzing intelligence reports, aerial photographs, and radio intercepts to build a comprehensive picture of German defensive positions throughout the sector. The key breakthrough had come from a new technique called survey and meteorological correlation that allowed American artillery units to accurately predict shell trajectories over distances that had previously been considered impossible for effective fire. By accounting for atmospheric conditions, Earth's rotation, and precise measurement of distances and elevations, the 155mm howitzers could place rounds within 50 meters of their intended targets at ranges exceeding 12 miles. Captain Michael Thompson, commanding A Battery's 4 howitzers, approached the command post with his firing data book. Thompson was a West Point graduate who had distinguished himself during the campaign in Italy, where his battery had provided crucial fire support during the breakthrough at Monte Cassino. His methodical approach to artillery preparation had made A Battery the most accurate unit in the battalion. "Sir, ammunition expenditure for the initial fire mission, 48 rounds high explosive. Target destroyed. Guns are ready for subsequent missions. Estimated time to reload and reposition, 12 minutes. Patterson nodded approvingly. The efficiency demonstrated by his gun crews represented countless hours of training in rapid displacement and ammunition handling. Unlike traditional artillery tactics that relied on fixed positions and pre-registered targets, the American doctrine emphasized mobility and flexibility that allowed artillery units to engage multiple targets while avoiding counter-battery fire. The tactical situation developing in this sector of Belgium represented exactly the type of warfare for which the 155mm howitzer had been designed. German forces had established defensive positions based on their experience from earlier in the war, when artillery engagements were conducted at ranges of 6 to 8 miles. The 14-mile range capability of the American guns created a tactical advantage that German commanders were struggling to understand. Major Harrison spread a detailed topographical map across the makeshift table, marking the locations of confirmed German positions with red pencils. Intelligence gathered from multiple sources over the past month had identified 17 enemy artillery batteries, 12 observation posts, and numerous supply depots within the extended range of the 155mm howitzers. The next target sequence should focus on their ammunition storage areas, Harrison suggested, pointing to several locations marked on the map. Signal intelligence indicates they're having supply problems, and destroying their stockpiles will force them to withdraw or risk running out of shells entirely. Patterson studied the proposed targets carefully. Each engagement had to be planned with consideration for ammunition conservation, since even the impressive American logistics network couldn't provide unlimited supplies for extended artillery duels. However, the psychological impact of destroying German positions from seemingly impossible ranges was proving as valuable as the physical destruction. Radio reports from forward observer teams were already indicating confusion and panic among German units that had suddenly found their previously safe positions under accurate fire. Lieutenant David Miller, positioned with the advancing infantry 3 miles ahead of the main American line, had transmitted descriptions of German troops abandoning positions that they had considered beyond enemy artillery range. The success of the morning's engagement also demonstrated the effectiveness of American communication systems that coordinated multiple elements across extended distances. Radio networks linked Patterson's Fire Direction Center with forward observers, aerial spotters, and higher command levels in a web of information that allowed rapid target identification and engagement. Captain Thompson returned to his battery position to prepare for the next fire mission, while Patterson and Harrison continued planning the systematic destruction of German defensive positions throughout the sector. The colonel understood that they were witnessing a transformation in artillery warfare that would have implications far beyond this particular engagement. Weather conditions remained favorable for long-range gunnery, with light winds and stable atmospheric pressure that would maintain the accuracy of their fire throughout the day. Meteorological data collected by specialized teams every 4 hours provided the precise information necessary for trajectory calculations at extended ranges. The German response to their losses was becoming apparent through radio intercepts translated by intelligence specialists attached to the battalion. Frantic communications between enemy units revealed confusion about the source and method of the American attacks, with some commanders requesting immediate reinforcement by forces that were no longer available. Patterson's executive officer, Major William Davies, emerged from the communications bunker with an updated intelligence summary. Davies had served with distinction in North Africa and Sicily, where he had developed expertise in coordinating artillery support for mobile operations. His experience with German tactics and equipment made him invaluable for predicting enemy responses to the devastating losses they were experiencing. "Sir, intercepts indicate the Germans are requesting immediate counter-battery support from course-level artillery," Davies reported. "However, their heavy guns are positioned too far east to reach our firing positions, and they appear to be unaware of our actual location." This tactical blindness represented another crucial advantage created by the extended range of the 155mm howitzers. German reconnaissance and observation methods were designed for conventional artillery ranges, leaving them unable to identify or effectively respond to threats originating from positions they couldn't see or reach with their own weapons. The afternoon's fire missions would focus on methodically destroying German supply lines and ammunition depots, using the superior range and accuracy of the American artillery to disrupt enemy logistics while remaining beyond the reach of effective retaliation. Patterson understood that this type of systematic destruction would force German commanders to choose between withdrawing their forces or watching them be eliminated piece by piece. As he prepared the firing orders for the next phase of operations, Colonel Patterson realized he was participating in a fundamental evolution of artillery warfare that would reshape military doctrine for decades to come. The technological superiority demonstrated by his battalion's 155mm howitzers had created tactical possibilities that would force every military in the world to reconsider their approach to long-range fire support. The emergency meeting at Wehrmacht Sector Command West took place in an underground bunker complex 15 miles behind the front lines. Oberst Friedrich Mannheim, the sector artillery commander, stared at the situation map with growing alarm as reports continued flooding in from across his defensive zone. In less than 6 hours, he had lost contact with 8 artillery batteries, representing nearly 30% of his sector's fire support. Mannheim was a career artillery officer who had commanded batteries during the Wehrmacht's greatest victories in Poland, France, and the early stages of Operation Barbarossa. His expertise in coordinating massed artillery fire had earned him the Knight's Cross and rapid promotion through the officer ranks. But the tactical situation developing along his sector defied everything he understood about artillery warfare. Major Ernst Hoffmann, the sector intelligence officer, approached the map table carrying a folder thick with intercepts, reconnaissance reports, and damage assessments. Hoffmann had spent the war analyzing Allied capabilities and had developed an almost encyclopedic knowledge of American weapons and tactics. His current expression suggested he was encountering something completely outside his experience. "Sir, preliminary analysis indicates the Americans have deployed artillery systems with ranges significantly exceeding anything in our intelligence files," Hoffmann reported, his voice tight with concern. "Estimated firing positions place their guns between 12 and 15 miles from our forward batteries, distances we considered tactically impossible for effective counter-battery work." Mannheim studied the plotted firing solutions that Hoffmann had calculated based on shell trajectories and impact patterns. The mathematics were undeniable, but the implications challenged fundamental assumptions about defensive positioning that had guided German strategy throughout the war. "What do we know about these weapons?" Mannheim asked. Intelligence sources suggest their designated M114 155mm howitzers recently arrived from American production facilities. Weight approximately 12,000 pounds, capable of firing projectiles weighing up to 95 pounds. Most significantly, they appear to incorporate fire control systems that provide accuracy at extended ranges previously thought impossible. The tactical revolution represented by these American artillery pieces created problems that extended far beyond simple range calculations. German defensive doctrine relied on positioning artillery batteries beyond the effective reach of enemy counter-battery fire, while maintaining observation and fire control over approaches to their infantry positions. The American weapons had created a gap in this defensive framework that threatened the entire sector. Generalmajor Kurt Steinberg, commanding the 47th Infantry Division, entered the bunker accompanied by his operations staff. Steinberg had fought on every major front since 1940 and had earned a reputation for innovative defensive tactics that maximized the effectiveness of limited resources. His division held the critical central sector where American forces were preparing their main assault. "The situation is becoming untenable," Steinberg announced without preamble. "My forward positions are being systematically destroyed by artillery fire originating from positions my observers cannot locate. Requests for counter-battery support have been ineffective because our guns cannot reach the enemy firing positions." Mannheim nodded grimly. The tactical dilemma was unprecedented in his experience. German artillery doctrine emphasized superior training, precise observation, and concentrated fire that could overwhelm enemy positions through coordinated salvos. But these advantages meant nothing when enemy guns could engage from ranges that rendered German weapons ineffective. Mannheim consulted his intelligence summary before continuing his briefing. Analysis of shell fragments recovered from impact sites confirms these are American 155 projectiles, but manufactured with quality control standards that suggest significant improvements in metallurgy and explosive composition. The blast effects exceed our calculations for conventional high-explosive rounds. The technical sophistication evident in the American artillery attack represents resources and industrial capacity that Germany could no longer match. While German factories struggled to maintain production of existing weapons designs, American industry was clearly developing improved systems that provided decisive tactical advantages. Captain Ludwig Richter, the sector communications officer, approached with a stack of radio transcripts intercepted from American units. Richter had served with signals intelligence units since 1941 and had become expert at analyzing enemy communications for tactical intelligence. His current findings suggested coordination methods that German forces had never encountered. "Sir, American radio traffic indicates they're using centralized fire direction centers that coordinate multiple artillery battalions simultaneously. Their targeting procedures incorporate meteorological data, survey measurements, and mathematical calculations that allow precision engagement at unprecedented distances." This level of coordination represented a fundamental evolution in artillery tactics that went far beyond simply building guns with longer range. The Americans had developed systematic procedures for managing complex firing solutions across extended distances, while maintaining the accuracy necessary for effective target destruction. Generalmajor Steinberg spread tactical maps across the briefing table, highlighting the positions his division was attempting to hold against increasing American pressure. "My infantry commanders report that previously secure assembly areas and supply points are now being engaged by accurate artillery fire. Positions we selected specifically because they were beyond enemy range are being systematically destroyed." The psychological impact on German troops was becoming as significant as the physical destruction. Infantry units that had relied on artillery support for defensive fire are discovering that their own guns are being eliminated faster than they could engage American positions.
Morale problems are already appearing among units that had never previously questioned German tactical superiority. Oberst Mannheim realized he was facing a decision that would affect not just his sector, but potentially the entire Western Front's defensive strategy. The conventional response would be to concentrate remaining artillery for a coordinated counterattack against the American positions. But intelligence indicated that such an attack would place his guns within range of the superior American weapons while failing to effectively engage the enemy batteries. "What do we know about these weapons?" Mannheim asked. Luftwaffe resources in this sector have been reduced to minimal levels. The Americans maintain continuous fighter patrols that make daylight reconnaissance extremely hazardous. Night flights have been attempted, but cloud cover and American anti-aircraft capabilities have prevented effective observation. The lack of effective reconnaissance created a tactical blindness that compounded the problems created by the superior range of American artillery. Captain Richter interrupted with an urgent radio message that had just arrived from forward positions. "Sir, American infantry forces are advancing under cover of their artillery preparation. Lead elements are approximately 4 miles from our main defensive line, supported by armor and self-propelled guns."
The coordinated American assault was clearly designed to exploit the destruction of German artillery support. With counter-battery capabilities neutralized, American forces could advance with minimal risk from defensive fire while maintaining continuous artillery support from their long-range howitzers. Mannheim faced the harsh reality that his carefully prepared defensive positions were being systematically dismantled by weapons and tactics for which German forces had no effective counter. The technological and tactical superiority demonstrated by the American 155mm howitzers had created a gap in defensive capability that threatened to collapse the entire sector. As he prepared orders for a general withdrawal to secondary defensive positions, Oberst Mannheim understood that he was witnessing the emergence of artillery capabilities that would fundamentally alter the nature of modern warfare. The devastating effectiveness of the American long-range guns represented not just a tactical defeat, but a technological evolution that would force military doctrine to adapt to new realities of extended-range precision fire. Technical Sergeant Frank Morrison crouched behind the massive steel shield of his M114 howitzer, adjusting the elevation mechanism with practiced precision. Morrison had joined the Army straight from a machine shop in Detroit, where his experience with heavy manufacturing equipment made him a natural fit for artillery operations. Now, after 18 months of combat across Europe, he had become one of the most skilled gun chiefs in the 284th Field Artillery Battalion. The howitzer itself was a marvel of American engineering, weighing nearly 6 tons and capable of hurling its 95-pound shells across distances that amazed even experienced artillerymen. Morrison's crew had fired over 300 rounds since arriving in Belgium, and the weapon continued to perform with mechanical reliability that reflected the quality of American manufacturing. Private First Class Danny Walsh, the ammunition handler, emerged from the supply bunker carrying another high-explosive shell. Walsh was barely 19 years old, a farm boy from Iowa who had volunteered for artillery service because he wanted to operate the big guns that were winning the war. His enthusiasm for the technical aspects of gunnery had made him invaluable for the complex loading procedures required by the 155mm howitzer. "Next mission coming down from the Fire Direction Center," Morrison announced to his crew. "German supply convoy, range 13 miles, 200 meters. The target represented exactly the type of long-range precision mission that demonstrated the revolutionary capabilities of the M114 howitzer system. German supply convoys had previously been relatively safe once they moved beyond the 8-mile range of conventional artillery, but the American guns could now engage targets throughout the enemy rear areas with devastating accuracy.
Corporal Eugene Parker, the gun's chief computer operator, consulted his firing tables and began calculating the precise elevation and deflection settings required for the engagement. Parker had been a bookkeeper in civilian life, and his mathematical skills had earned him an assignment to the most technically demanding position on the gun crew. His calculations accounted for atmospheric pressure, wind speed, temperature, and even the rotation of the Earth to ensure accuracy at extreme ranges. The Fire Direction Center had provided meteorological data collected just 30 minutes earlier by specialized weather teams equipped with instruments more sophisticated than anything used by civilian meteorologists. This information was crucial for maintaining accuracy at ranges where minor atmospheric variations could cause shells to miss their targets by hundreds of meters. Deflection right 47 mils, elevation 215 mils, Parker announced after completing his calculations. Morrison and his crew moved with choreographed efficiency to prepare the howitzer for firing. The elevation mechanism required precise adjustment to achieve the high trajectory for long-range engagement, while the deflection controls oriented the gun toward the target bearing calculated by the Fire Direction Center. The ammunition itself represented significant improvements over earlier artillery shells. Each 95-pound projectile contained advanced explosive compounds that provided greater blast effect than conventional rounds, while improved manufacturing techniques ensured consistent ballistic performance that maintained accuracy across extended ranges. Private Walsh positioned the heavy shell in the loading tray, while Corporal James Butler, the assistant gunner, prepared the propelling charges that would send the projectile on its 14-mile journey to the target. Butler had worked in a chemical plant before the war, and his understanding of explosive compounds made him expert at handling the various charge combinations used for different ranges and trajectory requirements. The propelling charge system used by the M114 howitzer allowed precise control over muzzle velocity, which was essential for achieving accuracy at variable ranges. Different combinations of powder bags could be used to adjust the shell's trajectory, providing flexibility that made the weapon effective against targets at any distance within its maximum range. Charge 7, high explosive, impact fuse, Morrison called out as he verified the firing data one final time. The precision required for successful long-range gunnery demanded absolute accuracy in every aspect of the firing process. A single error in calculation, ammunition handling, or gun positioning could result in shells landing miles from their intended targets, wasting precious ammunition and alerting enemy forces to the American artillery positions. Staff Sergeant Carl Anderson, the battery's chief surveyor, had spent weeks precisely measuring distances and elevations throughout the operational area. Anderson's work with sophisticated surveying instruments provided the accurate baseline data that made long-range precision possible. His measurements were so precise that shells could be placed within 50 meters of their targets even at maximum range. The surveying process involved techniques borrowed from civilian engineering and construction projects adapted for military use under combat conditions. Teams of surveyors worked continuously to update position data as the artillery battalion moved to new firing positions, ensuring that the guns could engage targets accurately regardless of their location. The Fire Direction Center transmitted the final firing command, and Morrison's crew completed their preparations with the smooth coordination that comes from hundreds of hours of training and months of combat experience. The howitzer was loaded, aimed, and ready to deliver its devastating payload to a German supply convoy that believed itself safely beyond American artillery range. "Battery fire!" came the command over the radio network. Morrison pulled the firing lanyard, and the M114 howitzer erupted with a thunderous roar that shook the ground for hundreds of meters around the gun position. The massive recoil mechanism absorbed the tremendous energy generated by the explosion, while the gun crew immediately began preparing for the next round in the fire mission.
The shell arced high into the Belgian sky, following a ballistic trajectory calculated to intersect with the German convoy at precisely the moment it reached a predetermined checkpoint on a road 13 miles away. The mathematics involved in this engagement represented the culmination of decades of research into long-range gunnery and the application of advanced industrial technology to military operations. Within seconds of firing, Morrison's crew was already loading the next shell, while Corporal Parker calculated minor adjustments based on observed weather conditions and initial impact reports from forward observers. The rapid-fire capability of the M114 Howitzer allowed sustained bombardment that could destroy entire target areas within minutes of the initial engagement. Radio reports from aerial spotters confirmed that the first salvo had achieved direct hits on the German convoy, destroying several vehicles and scattering the remainder across the countryside. The psychological impact of accurate long-range fire was proving as devastating as the physical destruction, as German forces realized that nowhere within their operational area was beyond the reach of American artillery. Private Walsh prepared another high-explosive shell, while the gun crew made minor adjustments to their firing data based on the success of the initial rounds. The systematic destruction of German logistics and supply capabilities represented a new form of warfare that leveraged American technological superiority to achieve tactical advantages that were reshaping the entire character of the European conflict. The abandoned German artillery position told a story of devastation that First Lieutenant Samuel Richardson had never witnessed in 2 years of combat across North Africa and Italy. Richardson commanded C Company, 2nd Battalion, 116th Infantry Regiment, and his men had just occupied the hilltop monastery that Captain Heinrich Müller's battery had defended until that morning. The precision of the American artillery strike was evident in every crater and twisted piece of metal scattered across the position. Richardson was a graduate of Virginia Military Institute who had distinguished himself during the fighting at Anzio, where his company had held defensive positions against repeated German counterattacks. His experience with enemy artillery made him acutely aware of the tactical significance represented by the destruction surrounding his current position. The German guns had been eliminated so completely that his infantry advance had encountered no resistance whatsoever. Sergeant First Class Thomas Bradley, Richardson's platoon sergeant, emerged from the ruins of what had been the German observation post. Bradley was a regular Army veteran who had served with the 1st Infantry Division since before the war, and his expertise in small unit tactics had kept C Company effective through months of continuous combat. His current expression reflected amazement at the thoroughness of the artillery preparation. "Sir, preliminary count indicates 4 88mm anti-tank guns and 2 105mm howitzers completely destroyed. Ammunition storage areas detonated, communication equipment demolished, no survivors located. The position was neutralized with surgical precision." The level of destruction achieved by the American 155mm howitzers represented a quantum leap in artillery effectiveness that had implications extending far beyond this single engagement. Richardson understood that his infantry was advancing behind a curtain of fire support more devastating and precise than anything American forces had previously possessed. Private First Class Joseph Martinez, a radio man from New Mexico, established communication with battalion headquarters while Richardson's other platoons secured the surrounding area. Martinez had joined the company as a replacement after the breakout from Normandy, and his reliability with communication equipment had made him invaluable for coordinating the complex operations required by modern infantry tactics. "Battalion reports all objectives secured ahead of schedule," Martinez announced. "German resistance has been minimal throughout the sector, with most enemy positions abandoned after artillery preparation." The systematic elimination of German defensive capabilities was creating opportunities for rapid advance that exceeded the most optimistic projections made by divisional planners. Infantry units were discovering that positions they had expected to assault under heavy fire had been abandoned by defenders who recognized they could no longer effectively resist American attacks. Captain Derek Hamilton, commanding the company's attached forward observer team, approached Richardson's position carrying sophisticated radio equipment and detailed maps marked with firing data. Hamilton was an artillery officer who had requested assignment to forward observer duty because he wanted to see firsthand the effectiveness of the new long-range howitzer systems. His reports would influence artillery doctrine development for years to come. The 284th Field Artillery Battalion is prepared to engage targets throughout the German rear area, Hamilton informed Richardson. Current ammunition supply allows sustained operations for at least 48 hours, with additional supplies en route from division artillery parks. The logistical capabilities supporting the American artillery offensive represented industrial capacity and organizational efficiency that German forces could no longer match. Continuous streams of ammunition trucks, fuel tankers, and maintenance vehicles kept the howitzer batteries supplied and operational despite the enormous consumption of resources required by extended-range gunnery. Staff Sergeant William Cooper, leading the company's weapons platoon, had positioned his heavy machine guns and mortars to provide fire support for the continued advance. Cooper was a veteran of the Pacific Theater who had transferred to Europe specifically to participate in the final offensive against Germany. His experience with Japanese defensive tactics provided valuable insights for dealing with enemy positions that might attempt last-ditch resistance. The tactical situation developing across the entire sector reflected fundamental changes in warfare that were becoming apparent to experienced soldiers at every level of command. The superior range and accuracy of American artillery had created tactical possibilities that traditional military doctrine had not anticipated, allowing infantry advances that proceeded faster and with fewer casualties than anyone had thought possible. Richardson's advance elements reported contact with German rearguard positions approximately 2 miles ahead of the main American line. However, these positions were being systematically engaged by artillery fire that arrived before the infantry could even identify specific targets. The coordination between forward observers and fire direction centers was so precise that enemy positions were being destroyed almost as quickly as they could be located. The psychological impact on German forces was becoming as significant as the physical destruction. Radio intercepts translated by intelligence specialists revealed increasing panic among enemy commanders who found themselves unable to establish effective defensive positions anywhere within their operational area. The long-range precision of American artillery had created a tactical environment where traditional defensive warfare had become impossible. Private Martinez received updated intelligence reports indicating that German forces throughout the sector were beginning a general withdrawal towards prepared positions further east. However, even these secondary defensive lines were within range of the American howitzers, making it unlikely that the enemy could establish effective resistance anywhere in the region. Captain Hamilton coordinated with aerial observers flying in Piper Cub aircraft that had been modified specifically for artillery spotting duties. These aircraft carried radio equipment that allowed direct communication with fire direction centers, providing real-time target identification and damage assessment that made artillery fire even more effective than ground-based observation. The integration of air and ground observation represented another technological advancement that multiplied the effectiveness of American artillery. Aerial spotters could identify targets beyond the range of ground-based observers, while providing continuous surveillance of enemy movements across extended areas. This capability allowed artillery commanders to engage targets of opportunity while maintaining systematic destruction of planned objectives. Richardson's company continued its advance through terrain that showed clear evidence of the thoroughness of American artillery preparation. Supply routes had been systematically destroyed, communication lines severed, and defensive positions obliterated with precision that reflected careful planning and superior technology. The German defensive system that had held American forces for weeks had been dismantled in a matter of hours. The technical sophistication evident in the artillery support was matched by improvements in infantry equipment and organization that made rapid advancements possible. Richardson's men carried improved radios, more effective weapons, and enhanced ammunition loads that allowed sustained operations over extended distances. The combination of superior fire support and better-equipped infantry created tactical capabilities that German forces could not match. Sergeant Bradley's reconnaissance teams reported discovering abandoned German equipment that indicated hasty withdrawal under extreme pressure. Artillery pieces had been left in firing positions, ammunition supplies remained intact, and personal equipment suggested that enemy troops had fled without attempting to conduct organized resistance. The speed and precision of American artillery had prevented effective German response. The strategic implications of the day's operations extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The demonstration of long-range precision artillery capabilities would influence military planning and weapons development for decades to come. Every major military in the world would be forced to reconsider their artillery doctrine in light of the effectiveness demonstrated by American forces. Captain Hamilton's after-action reports would document not just the tactical success of the engagement, but the revolutionary nature of the weapons and techniques that had made such success possible. The M114 Howitzer system represented the convergence of advanced metallurgy, sophisticated mathematics, precise manufacturing, and systematic organization that characterized American industrial superiority. As Richardson's company prepared to continue its advance toward the next series of objectives, the lieutenant reflected on the transformation in warfare he was witnessing. The technological advantages possessed by American forces had created tactical possibilities that were reshaping the fundamental nature of military operations. The devastating effectiveness of long-range precision artillery had opened new chapters in military doctrine that would influence warfare for generations. The German artillery that had dominated European battlefields for years had been rendered obsolete not just by superior technology, but by systematic approaches to warfare that leveraged American industrial capacity and organizational efficiency. The howitzers that had destroyed Captain Mueller's battery represented more than just longer range and greater accuracy. They embodied a comprehensive revolution in military capability that was determining the outcome of the war. Private Martinez received orders for the company's next objective, a German supply depot located 6 miles ahead that was already being engaged by the long-range howitzers. Richardson understood that his infantry would once again advance into positions that had been systematically prepared by artillery fire delivered from distances the enemy had never encountered. The pattern established during the morning's operations would continue throughout the offensive, with American technological superiority creating tactical advantages that made German resistance increasingly futile. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.